Hello, welcome everyone. I'm watching our participant count pop up here, so I wanted to give people just a moment or so to get signed in before we get started with our presentation today. I am Lisa with the Law Library, and with us today is Cleo Spencer from the Center for Community Solutions. I will let her tell you a little bit more about them and what they do once she gets started. Before I turn things over to Cleo, I'm going to just do a little bit of housekeeping today, especially for those of you who might not regularly attend our webinars. This is going to be an interactive presentation today. If you have questions that you want to ask Cleo, either that you already have in your head or that you think about during the presentation, you can do that. We ask that you use the Q&A function in Zoom to post your questions. You'll see a couple of speech bubbles with an icon that says Q&A on your screen, and you just click on there. You type in your question. You can either use your name or anonymous, no problem, whatever you're comfortable with. We would ask that you keep your questions general today and not speak about very specific situations or personal information. You will also see a link to a survey at the end of the presentation today. We would really appreciate if you take a few minutes to take the survey. I think it just has 7 questions and it's pretty quick to go through, and we really appreciate your feedback. This presentation today is not offering continuing legal education credit, CLE. So just in case there's anyone here looking for CLE credit, this is not the presentation for that. This really is just an informational presentation today for the public. And then finally, this will be posted on our YouTube channel later this week for San Diego Law Library YouTube channel. If you know of anyone else who might be interested in or benefit from this information, then please refer them to find this recording on our YouTube channel. It should be up by maybe Thursday this week. And we'll also include a copy of the slides that you're going to see today. So I think that's everything that I had, and I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Cleo.
All right. Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a good Monday. Thank y'all for being here. As I get started today, I'm going to just share a little bit first about myself. So my name is Cleo Spencer. I use she, her pronouns, and I work at Center for Community Solutions as the training manager. So basically what that means is that I help to manage our 65.5-hour crisis intervention training program that helps us certify our staff and volunteers to have confidential communications with survivors who are seeking services with us. And I also provide training for community members like you all on sexual and relationship violence. And I've been working with CCS for about 5 years now. And before that, I've also been involved with survivor advocacy and education for a few years before that as well, doing different volunteer work, supporting my community. And I'm definitely really personally committed to this work. So I hope that I can share some of the knowledge that I've learned over the years with you all today. And please do ask any questions because I want to make sure that you all get the most out of this presentation as well. So I wanted to also share as a quick check-in as we get started today. I know that y'all will be mostly asking questions in that Q&A box, but just for yourselves as you're getting started here, I know that this topic of relationship violence can be very difficult. And so I want to invite folks just to continue to check in with themselves, not only at the start of today's training, but also as we go through this hour. So where are you at right now? And this little exercise of looking at these different blobs can kind of help us identify where we're at, what we're feeling. I think for me right now, I might say I'm maybe 15, you know, I'm hanging in there. I'm here and waving hello to you all. But I could be, you know, could be a little bit more comfortable if I was closer to the ground, but I'm doing all right. So I invite you again to check in with yourself of where you're at right now. And then as we go through the training, please continue to check in with yourself. We really want to emphasize and encourage y'all to practice self-care in this presentation. You're welcome to take a break at any point if you need to step away. And we also invite you to participate, to ask questions, put those in the Q&A box. Also, similar to what Lisa mentioned at the beginning of the training, I want to just emphasize that we don't want to necessarily share in this training space personal experiences or specific situations, but we do want to speak from I statements. So recognizing that everyone's experience is different, and sometimes our own experience is going to be different from someone else's. So just recognizing the need for those I statements to be specific about our own questions and our own experiences. And then maintaining confidentiality. So if things are shared in this space, again, we want to make sure we're not sharing things we don't want to have posted onto that YouTube account. So keeping in mind confidentiality. And if you do want to talk with a confidential person after this training, you're more than welcome to reach out to CCS to talk to one of our confidential advocates. And I'll share more about that as we go on here. Okay, so a little bit about Center for Community Solutions before we jump into things as well. So if you haven't already heard of us, we are a local organization based in San Diego, and it is our mission to end relationship and sexual violence by being a catalyst for caring communities in social justice. We have offices in Pacific Beach, which is the one you see here in the photo, as well as El Cajon and Escondido. And I'll talk more about our services at the end of the presentation, but I just wanted to let you know that we have been around in San Diego since 1969. So we've been doing a lot of different work over the years, but our core mission and goal is to be able to support survivors of sexual and relationship violence.
Hi, Cleo. I just wanted to pop back in because we got a question that I thought it might be beneficial for you to answer at the outset.
Mhm.
We have an attendee who's asking, is this presentation geared towards service providers or individuals in abusive relationships themselves?
Yeah, great question. So this presentation is really geared for the general public. So it's not specific to service providers, but it's also not specific to survivors either. It's really more for anyone who might know somebody or in the future meet someone who's experienced violence, and really just giving a broad overview of what that looks like, what relationship violence is. So our three objectives for this presentation is really just to define what is intimate partner violence, so we can all better understand and recognize what that is and what the different tactics of abuse are within relationship violence. We're also going to identify warning signs and impacts of abuse. So again, for anybody who is these are things that anybody can recognize that might be seen in their own relationship or in relationships that they see around them and their friends or family. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about how to support someone in seeking help. And so again, this is for anyone, not for necessarily a service provider, but just for the general public of somebody who wants to support someone else in their life. And of course, this can also be helpful for supporting ourselves as well. So hopefully that answered your question. Thank you for asking. Okay, so to start off by just trying to, again, define what is intimate partner violence. So I know that in the title of this presentation and in our objectives, we were talking about relationship violence. And relationship violence is another way of talking about intimate partner violence. We also might hear this called domestic violence, dating violence, partner abuse, spousal abuse, or even teen dating violence specifically. And all these different terms kind of just help to describe a little bit of a different specific subcategory, but all of these could be considered intimate partner violence. And that's really the language that we use often as a Center for Community Solutions, because what we're talking about when we're talking about intimate partner violence is violence is happening between two people who are in some kind of intimate relationship. This doesn't have to be people who are necessarily dating. Obviously that would be a common situation. It can be people who are, maybe they're not considering themselves dating, but they've been on a few dates. This could be between people who are married. This could even be between people who are divorced or who are no longer in that relationship, but they had a previous relationship that was an intimate partner. So when we're talking about intimate partner violence, we may use any of these different terms. But at CCS, when we're really defining what does this look like what are actually the components that make up intimate partner violence, what we're looking for are kind of three key things. One is it's a recurring, chronic, deliberate pattern. So not something that's just a one-time thing. Obviously, violence, even if it's just one time, is not okay. But when we're talking about intimate partner violence, what we're really looking at is a system or a pattern of abuse where it's recurring, again, it's chronic and it's deliberate. The second thing we're looking for is that this pattern is being used to maintain power and control over another person, right? So with this pattern of abuse, we're seeing what we're going to look at a little bit more later, a power and control dynamic, where one person has power over the other, one person is controlling the other person through these abusive behaviors. And then the last thing we're looking for is, again, that current or former intimate partner. So if this is a pattern of abuse that's happening between a parent and a child, that is definitely under that umbrella of domestic violence, but it's not necessarily what we're talking about here today when we're talking about intimate partner violence, which is between that current or former intimate partner. And why it's really important to emphasize that it can be a current or former intimate partner is because sometimes people think that if somebody ends a relationship or leaves a relationship, that the violence is going to definitely stop. And unfortunately, sometimes we see that that doesn't happen, that even if somebody is divorced from that partner or they've broken up with that partner, that the violence can sometimes still continue. So keeping in mind, again, a current or former intimate partner. So let's talk a little bit more then about this piece about power and control. So I think this is really important, I think, to understand of what does that mean when we're talking about maintaining power and control. So there's a few different ways that we can think about power and control being maintained. And basically, these are different types of abuse that we might see, different tactics. I'd say that for many of us, we've probably heard of physical abuse before, and that's the first thing that comes to our mind. However, there's also other forms of abuse. There might be sexual abuse happening. There might be emotional or verbal abuse. There might be financial or economic abuse. There can also be identity or cultural abuse. So I'm going to give you all a minute here to think about this before I break these down a little bit more. So as we're looking at these different types of abuse, how could these maintain power and control in a relationship? What are some examples of these that we might have heard of or we might have seen before? And give you a second here to think about that. All right, so let's kind of unpack this then. Let's explore. So how do these things show up? When we're talking about physical abuse, we're talking about things like, right, hitting, pushing, slapping, any kind of physical violence, right? Some other things that are really important to mention as well is we're also talking about things like strangulation, which oftentimes people might refer to this as choking, or they may not even really name it at all, but this is actually a really common and unfortunately very dangerous form of physical abuse that we see within intimate partner violence. And really something that we want to be kind of listening out for and like looking out for, because strangulation, unfortunately, can lead very quickly and very easily to death. So we want to be really mindful that that's not something that's okay. That's not something that should be ever present in an intimate partner relationship. Physical intimidation as well can be part of physical abuse. So physical intimidation is preventing someone from leaving a room, maybe not physically even touching them, but with their physical body, preventing them from feeling safe, from being able to move freely. And that would definitely also fall under this category of, right, different types and tactics of abuse. Then we think about emotional and verbal abuse, right? Again, people often will think about this as well. We might think of insults, humiliation, threatening somebody. gaslighting or denial of abuse as well. So gaslighting, if you haven't heard that term before, basically means to make somebody doubt their own reality. Basically telling somebody that, oh no, you don't really know what happened, or you're not remembering that right, or basically making them question their own understanding or their own sanity. And that can be really, really dangerous, because that undermines someone's ability to think that they'll be believed, to seek support, or to trust themselves in what they know is happening. So emotional and verbal abuse, I think, is one that really is often underplayed, minimized, because a lot of people might think like, oh, well, this is just so common, so normal. But this can absolutely be just as harmful, and can absolutely just on its own be a way that someone is maintaining power and control over another person. And then, of course, we have sexual abuse. So sexual abuse, sometimes, again, people don't really think of this right away, because sometimes we don't think about the fact that, unfortunately, most sexual violence does happen within the context of intimate partner relationships. And that can look like any kind of forced or coerced sexual contact, or really just a disregard for consent at all due to the relationship status. So believing that you don't really ask for consent, or that it doesn't really matter if someone consents or not if you're in a relationship, which is absolutely not true. Even if you're in a relationship with somebody, nobody owes the other person sex at any point. It also can look like reproductive coercion. So reproductive coercion is basically forcing somebody to not use birth control, or use birth control or safer sex methods, forcing someone to become pregnant, sabotaging birth control, really anything that is, again, not a consensual agreement about what kind of safer sex practices to be using. This could also look like things that are not physical contact, but even things like forced viewing of porn, or other kinds of non-contact sexual violence that absolutely can happen within an intimate partner relationship. Okay. Again, I know this is kind of heavy to hear all of this laid out. So again, just check in with yourself if you need to get some water, take a breath. I'm going to share, though, the next two categories here, which I think are ones we hear less about usually, and people may not be as familiar with. So other ways that people may maintain power and control within an abusive relationship is through economic and financial abuse. And this, unfortunately, is so common. This can look like a lot of different things. This can look like one partner having all of the financial resources and preventing the other partner from having any control over the money, limiting them to a very strict allowance, preventing them from getting a job, and forcing them to be dependent on the other partner. This also can look like kind of the opposite of that. One partner basically taking advantage of the other partner's financial resources, ruining their credit by taking out credit cards in their name, or sabotaging their renting situation and ruining their rental history by getting them evicted. It can also look like just sabotaging educational or work opportunities in general. Maybe showing up with somebody's work and causing a big scene, or sabotaging their ability to turn in an assignment on time by keeping them up all night in a big fight. We also have here identity and cultural abuse. And identity and cultural abuse is the one I think is the hardest to kind of succinctly sum up, because it really covers such a wide variety of experiences that we have heard from survivors. Essentially, what it comes down to, though, is somebody using someone's identity or their cultural background to, again, maintain power and control over them. Whether this is isolating them from their friends, family, or community, preventing them from talking with those support systems or having people they can reach out to. Or this could be using a reputation in a shared community. So if other people around them think that this person is a hero in the community, a stand-up person, then that can make it really hard for someone to reach out for support, or it can give that person power over their partner. Also potentially using a shared belief system. So for example, somebody using religious values to control their partner. For example, saying that, well, you can't leave me because getting divorced in our religion is a sin. Things like that can be used to maintain power and control over a partner. Or using cultural advantages or identities, such as threatening to out a partner as part of the LGBTQ community, threatening to bring law enforcement or ICE involvement if this is a person of color or someone who's undocumented. So a lot of ways this can show up, but basically what this comes down to, again, is just that use of someone's identity or their culture to maintain power and control over them. All right, so now that we kind of talked about some of the different examples, different types of abuse that we might see, I want to also emphasize that people may be experiencing just one of these tactics of abuse or multiple. But the key thing, again, we're looking for is that pattern, right? Is this something that's recurring, that's continuing to happen, that is establishing power and control of one intimate partner over the other? And this has a lot of impacts on survivors. I wanted to share briefly here some of the different ways that intimate partner violence impacts those who are experiencing it. And this is from a National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey that was recently published. It was conducted back in 2016, 2017, but the results were recently published for us to be able to see. And just some of the things that we're seeing from this survey, right, is that 1 in 4 people who experience intimate partner violence are fearful. 1 in 3 had some kind of physical injury. 1 in 4 were concerned for their safety. 1 in 3 had PTSD symptoms. 1 in 8 needed some form of medical care, and 1 in 6 needed help from law enforcement. So there's many different ways that people are being impacted. And just to get into that a little bit more in detail here, right? Some of the different things that we've seen of impacts that happen are obviously those physical impacts, right? Needing medical attention, we saw that from the survey. This can be for so many different things, but one thing I wanted to highlight here is that unfortunately, intimate partner violence can lead to death. It can lead to homicide. And I think it's very important to mention because this is serious, right? I think sometimes we can, again, downplay or minimize the different violence that people might be experiencing in their intimate relationships, but these can have very serious consequences, as well as long-term health consequences. So developing gastrointestinal problems or cardiovascular disease, or the long-term impact of a traumatic brain injury can absolutely be an impact people are dealing with long after that relationship is over or long after they've even gotten to a safe situation. We also see mental health impacts, right? So we saw in the previous slide, right, about PTSD, but we also see some things like depression, suicidal behavior, hypervigilance, and also folks being at a higher risk of developing addictions as a way of coping. And I think this is, again, a great opportunity to emphasize that, we don't really know sometimes why people came to have an addiction or what they were going through that led that to be their coping mechanism. So a good reminder for us just to be empathetic and non-judgmental when we are seeing that someone is turning to that as a way to try to manage a very, very complex and challenging situation. We also see, of course, reproductive impacts. So when we're talking about, right, that sexual abuse or reproductive coercion, we might have things like unintended pregnancies or miscarriage. There's also the social impacts, which I think, again, are something that's just not as often really highlighted, but important to keep in mind that when someone is experiencing that level of power and control in their relationship, they often are having their support system completely broken down. That isolation is preventing them from being able to stay in contact or connected with their family and friends. And it also can cause them to struggle in the future with trusting other people or even forming new romantic relationships. Absolutely, if they've, have had this experience, it can be really challenging to, feel like I can get into a new relationship and really trust that that this person is not going to do the same thing to me, or that I'm not going to have, or I can be able to see the signs this time. Some additional other impacts might be that we see oftentimes, especially that emotional and verbal abuse, that intimate partner violence really erodes someone's self-esteem and their confidence, their ability to believe in themselves or to make decisions for themselves, especially when, as we know, that power and control piece, they've had power and control over their own life taken away from them. And so that can really undermine someone's confidence or ability to make decisions for themselves. We also see that it can compromise financial stability, looking back at that financial and economic abuse, which can also lead to things like houselessness. And unfortunately, we see that as also a major concern that people experience, where that may even be, in fact, a reason why they don't or can't leave. And that really leads us right into talking about that question of, okay, all of these different tactics, that seems horrible. And all these impacts is such a huge impact. So why don't people leave? And I want to speak a little bit here about the different barriers to leaving, because I think that it's usually a very well-intentioned thought, right? Of people just need to leave that relationship. They just need to get out. And as we've already talked about, right? Sometimes leaving doesn't even stop the violence. Unfortunately, sometimes we see that the violence still continues even after someone's left a relationship. And we also know in doing this work as service providers that leaving is one of the most dangerous times. And it typically takes people about 6 times to effectively leave an intimate partner violent situation. And why that is because leaving challenges the power and control dynamic. It takes power back and it takes control back. And that can be very threatening to the person who's trying to maintain power and control over another person, right? So that's what this first bullet point here about what are the barriers to leaving? Why don't people leave? It's that it is the tactics of abuse. All of those things we just talked about in terms of how abuse happens, that those are all barriers to leaving, right? The fact of someone maintaining power and control over another person, part of that is so that they can't leave, so that they don't feel like they're able to leave, whether that's through threats, whether that's through escalating physical violence, whether that's through, again, tearing down someone's self-esteem through emotional abuse, or preventing them from saving up money through financial abuse. All of those things prevent people from being able to leave very intentionally. And that is part of the way that abuse shows up, unfortunately. Another important factor to consider is that people also sometimes don't leave relationships because of all of the reasons why anyone might not want to leave a relationship. Even if, we are in a perfectly healthy relationship, sometimes there's reasons why we want to leave. And sometimes there's reasons why, even though we know we should leave that relationship, we don't, right? Things like having shared friends, having children together, maybe splitting rent. Maybe it's things just like that, even though you know it's not the right person for you, you still love that person. Or you think that maybe they'll change and that somehow things will be better or work out. So there's so many reasons why people stay in relationships, even when they're healthy. That also can show up in unhealthy relationships or abusive relationships. And especially that piece about loving that person still, I think we hear that from survivors a lot, that even with all of those different tactics of abuse, even with all those different impacts, oftentimes what people want is not to leave, but for the violence to stop, because they still love that person and they want them to be better. And that's really tough. That is a really tough part of intimate partner violence, that both and, right? That someone who you love can also be harming you. And then the last piece I want to mention here is that the barriers to leaving are also impacted by privilege and oppression. And what I mean by that is that there are so many factors that go into how somebody is able to access services, whether or not they have different resources available to them. And those things are also informed by our identity and our culture and who we are. So just like we saw with identity and cultural abuse, that someone's identity can be used against them to control them or manipulate them, we can see that that also shows up in how people are able to access services, or whether or not people have different barriers that they have to overcome in order to be able to leave that relationship. One example of this might be, a language barrier. If somebody is living in the United States and English is not their first language, or they don't have a very good understanding of English, it can be very difficult to access services, to get support. And if your intimate partner is the person who is translating for you and providing that interpretation for you, that can be a huge barrier to leaving that relationship and getting support. So let's now transition to talking a little bit about who actually experiences intimate partner violence, because I think that as we're talking about privilege and oppression, part of what we're also talking about is the fact that some people do experience more violence than others. Certain groups experience more violence than other groups. However, I also want to really emphasize here that anybody can be a victim of intimate partner violence. People from all walks of life, women, men, non-binary folks, everyone experiences intimate partner violence, and everyone can be a perpetrator of intimate partner violence. Everyone is capable of harm. You'll see that none of the tactics of abuse are solely based on being one type of person or having one identity. Anybody can do those things. And at the same time, there are, again, some groups who experience higher rates of violence than others. So I want to kind of break down that with a few statistics here that we can look at from that same survey I was mentioning earlier. So when we're looking at lifetime prevalence of victimization by an intimate partner, we're seeing here that women and men are both experiencing high rates of intimate partner violence. We see in particular when we look at psychological aggression, which can be also thought of, right, as emotional or verbal abuse, we're seeing that almost 1 in 2 women are experiencing emotional abuse, and right behind them, men as well. For physical violence, we're also seeing again that both women and men are experiencing very high rates of physical violence by an intimate partner at about 42% for each. And then we look at 2 other specific forms of abuse. When we're looking at stalking, we're seeing that women experience higher rates, but men are also experiencing stalking as well by an intimate partner. And we're also seeing for contact sexual violence that women are experiencing higher rates of sexual violence, but men are also experiencing this as well. And I think when we're looking at this, one thing I want to again point back to that with that piece of privilege and oppression, right? That why are women experiencing higher rates of contact sexual violence? I think it's very easy for us to maybe see, okay, well, that's probably because of the way that women are more likely to experience sexual violence as a whole, right? That sexual violence often targets women specifically due to the way that misogyny plays out in our culture, the way that women are often seen as sexual objects or seen as supposed to be providing sex to their partner. And so these kinds of cultural ideas, this kind of societal oppression of like the patriarchal system that we live in, leads to these kinds of statistics where we're seeing that women experience higher rates of violence when it comes to sexual violence in a relationship. We also can see this a little bit when we look at race and ethnicity. So this is the lifetime prevalence of contact sexual violence, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner, broken down by race and ethnicity, as well as gender here as well. And what we see here is that multiracial folks and also American Indian, Alaskan Native folks are experiencing some of the higher rates of violence, as well as Black individuals too, across both men and women. And again, why are we seeing some of these discrepancies? I think we can look back to the role of societal oppression, societal violence. And I think it's just important here to recognize that these discrepancies and these disproportionate impacts really point to that connection between the way that we might experience oppression or societal violence, and how that informs interpersonal relationships too. That if there's a power dynamic at the social, societal level, there's also a power dynamic in our interpersonal relationships. And unfortunately, that can be taken advantage of. We also see some of these discrepancies within the LGBT community as well. So this, again, isn't specifically pulling in information about non-binary or trans individuals. So it is just focusing on lesbian, gay, bisexual for this statistics here, which is a limitation of this survey. But what we do see here is that lesbian women and then also bisexual women and men experience higher rates of violence than their heterosexual peers, as well as gay men. So I think that what we're seeing here again is right that when people are experiencing more social or societal oppression, marginalization, there's more likely a chance for them to experience violence within their interpersonal relationship as well, because of the lack of representation of healthy relationships in the media, because of power dynamics within the relationship. So many reasons that I don't have time to get into all of them today, but just to note that's why we're seeing these disproportionate rates of violence against certain communities. And the last statistic that I'll share with you as well from the same survey is just when people are first experiencing this type of violence. And I think this is very telling that we see that the vast majority are experiencing it between 18 and 24 years of age, their first experience of intimate partner violence. And the next biggest group is 17 years and younger. So I think what this really shows us as well is that it's really important for us to be talking about unhealthy relationships and abuse with young people in our lives, because it's not just something that is happening to those who are in what we might consider like more mature or older relationships. It's happening even in people's first relationships they are having as teenagers. And really, how can we support them and be able to recognize these signs, recognize what is not okay for them to be experiencing in a relationship? So that really leads us then into talking about what are those warning signs? What are those things that we can be looking out for in our own relationship, but also with others in our lives? And I kind of broke this down into two pieces, right? Looking first at from the perspective of the abusive partner, and then also from the survivor and victim, right? Some people prefer to be referred to as a victim, some prefer to be referred to as a survivor, so I've put both there. But really, when we're talking about an abusive partner, some of the things we're looking at are things like extreme jealousy. So this is jealousy of not just maybe other people who they think are romantic relationships, but even jealousy of friends, jealousy of family, jealousy of anything that takes that person away from spending time with their partner, anything that feels like it's preventing them from having that power and control over them. So this is also what often then leads to things like isolating them from their family or isolating them from their friends. Maybe a partner telling them that, oh, you really shouldn't hang out with your family that much, or, oh, I don't think those friends are good for you. Again, really trying to isolate them from anything that could be taking them away from focusing on that partner. We also see things like monitoring. So especially monitoring someone's location, having to know where they are at all times. This is definitely a way that often we then see leads to stalking behaviors, or just monitoring their contact with other people, right? So who are you talking to? Who are you with? Again, really just trying to control who they associate with, where they go. Their freedom of movement is really constricted. And then also seeing a lack of respect for their partner. So maybe belittling their partner, again, humiliation or putting them down in front of others, not really respecting their choices or trying to make decisions for them. These are all things we might be like wanting to follow up with, wanting to be like, that actually doesn't really seem like how they should be treating you. That doesn't really feel like the way that your partner should be talking about you. And we also have here from the survivor and victim, right? So kind of similar things, right? If the person is having to ask for permission or not being able to answer for themselves about different things, right? And this is different from someone saying, oh, like, let me check with my partner because, you know, I respect that we had plans or that they might have some thoughts about this. This is someone not even being able to commit to anything or never being able to make decisions for themselves because they're always having to check with their partner. They're always having to get permission, even for the most simple of things. This also can look like frequent absences from normal activities. So changes where maybe they always used to come to family game night and now all of a sudden they always have an excuse for they can't come. Them also having a lack of trust in their partner. You know, not really believing that they're going to follow through on something, feeling that they're going to be betrayed. We definitely see betrayal as another thing that can come up in intimate partner violence as well. They may even deny or minimize harm. So this can kind of be confusing sometimes for folks who are trying to help or support somebody. They might say like, well, why are you pretending like this is not a big deal? Or why are you denying that this is happening? And usually that is a way of protecting themselves because sometimes these relationships, it can feel like if you share something or if more people start to know what's going on, more violence is going to happen. That it can actually, even if we're trying to help, make things worse to try to confront the abusive partner or try to force somebody to seek help if they're not ready yet. So recognizing that denial or minimization of harm can also point to that power and control dynamic that's preventing someone from feeling safe getting support. And then, of course, unexplained injuries, just experiencing that physical abuse and maybe finding a different reason or excuse to blame it on, like, oh, I'm just really clumsy, things that are obviously not where that injury came from. So one thing I wanted to mention here as well is that sometimes people refer to the cycle of abuse, which can be another thing that can be helpful to be able to look out for, because abuse is not something that always is a tactic of abuse or violence all the time. Sometimes it is. So not everyone experiences a cycle of abuse, but for some people, what they will experience is that it comes like a roller coaster, that there are kind of that tension building phase where you're kind of going up the roller coaster, right? Building height there, you're having increased tension, maybe communication is breaking down. The survivor or the victim is feeling fearful. And then you have actually that drop, the incident of the tactic of verbal, emotional, or physical abuse, sexual abuse. There's anger, maybe there's arguments, threats, intimidation. But then things reconcile. You kind of slow down, and then you have a abuser who may be apologizing. They may be giving excuses. They may deny the abuse occurred or blame the victim for what happened. Maybe even start to gaslight them, say that it's not as bad as they thought, or they're just misremembering what happened. And then there's this calm period, sometimes called like the honeymoon phase, where everything is forgotten and actually things might even be good. They might be great. They may be having happy moments together. They may be having that hope that this person actually is going to change this time and be different. And this is something that is, again, a warning sign we can be looking out for, is this kind of roller coaster of emotions, these high highs and low lows, these moments of this is like, you know, the best relationship I've ever been in to this is like the worst relationship I've ever been in. This is like not okay treatment, right? And unfortunately, this can also in itself be a barrier for somebody leaving because they may feel like, well, he said he was going to change. She said that she would do things differently next time. They said that, you know, that was just one time that would happen. And unfortunately, that continues, though. It keeps being a pattern, and this cycle just keeps going. And it is very unfortunate that hope is so, it can be very addictive. It can be really appealing to believe that someone is going to change, and that especially somebody you love, who you want it to change. But unfortunately, this can really trap people in that cycle. that period of calm. And so something again to recognize is that an abusive person may not be abusive or violent all the time. It may just be at specific instances or specific times in a pattern. Okay, so we are seeing someone who we think is experiencing abuse. We're seeing these different warning signs. We're noticing some of these different tactics of abuse. What do we actually do? And I have a few different tips for you all, and then I also am going to share some resources about CCS offers. So I think the biggest tip is really something that you'll probably have heard a million times already, which is to believe them, right? So often people are afraid to come forward and talk about abuse that they're experiencing, or they're afraid to talk about it at all because they feel that people aren't going to believe them, that they're going to think it's their fault, that they're going to think, well, what did you do to get them to act like this? And so it's so important to listen and believe them, that it is not their fault, that nobody deserves to experience abuse. No one deserves to experience violence. There's no reason or thing that someone can do that would justify that kind of treatment. It's also so important to just be empathetic and to validate their feelings. People can feel all different kinds of ways. Some people may be using humor as a way to cope. Some people may be crying. Some people might be angry. There's no right way to feel. So really validating and holding space for however that person feels, wherever they're at, is important, and not assuming they should look a certain way or be expressing themselves a certain way. It also can be helpful to ask open-ended questions and just be non-judgmental, right? So you might have some questions. You might be curious to understand a little bit more about what's going on. And it can be really helpful, again, just to leave that be really non-judgmental by keeping it open. So instead of saying a question like, is your partner abusing you? That's a close-ended question where the person kind of is forced into a corner of saying yes or no. They're probably not going to be fully honest with you. Versus asking that open-ended question that's non-judgmental might be, how have things been going in your relationship? Or what's been going on between you and your partner? That leaves it really open for the person to describe what's happening to them with their own words, not having to take on this really intense label. Sometimes that can be really daunting for someone to take on that label of intimate partner violence. Or, maybe they don't want to stigmatize their partner by calling them an abuser. That can be really challenging. So using their own language, keeping it open-ended, allows that person to share without feeling judged. And again, affirming that no one deserves to experience abuse. And sometimes people might push you away. Sometimes people might feel like, whoa, like I'm not ready to talk about this yet. I don't think anything's wrong with my relationship. Actually, everything's great. And that can, again, come up for so many different reasons where people might deny or minimize the abuse. What we can do in those situations is just maintain connection. So don't let isolation and that abusive partner get in between you two. Keep showing up, keep reaching out. Even if the person isn't ready yet to talk, you can let them know that when you are ready, I'm here. And I'm concerned about you, So really just, trying to prevent that person from being isolated, even if they're not ready to talk about it or gets help right at that moment. So some of the don'ts, right? I already kind of mentioned these, but avoid labeling their experience for them. Avoid telling them what to do. Again, it might seem very well-intentioned to say, okay, you got to get out, you got to leave this relationship today. Sometimes that's not going to be what's best for them, actually. And when we tell somebody what they should do or what they have to do, it again can start to create that divide between us and make them feel like, well, I have to now choose between this person who I love and this other person who I love. And we don't want to put that person in the position of feeling like they have to make a choice, because unfortunately, with that power and control dynamic, they may end up choosing their abuser over you. So we want to keep in mind that idea of letting them be the expert on their own life, that they really know what's best, what's safest for them. And we can show up and so show support and show concern without telling them what they have to do or what they should do. We also want to avoid comments like, don't cry, don't be upset, or everything will be okay. Because, we can't guarantee that everything will be okay. We don't know that. That can be really invalidating to hear when you're trying to talk to someone about something that's really upsetting and really challenging. And the first thing they say is, "Oh, it's going to be okay. Don't cry." That can feel really invalidating. So we want to avoid doing that. And then again, right, don't assume that you know what is best for them and their relationship. So how do we actually do this? What are some ways we can get started? Some more tips here, right? So talk to the survivor in private. As I mentioned earlier, it can actually cause more harm to necessarily confront the abusive person or to address this in front of them. That might actually increase the violence that they're experiencing in private. So it's better to talk to the survivor one-on-one in a private place so that they aren't, that's not being alerting the abuser that somebody is picking up on what's going on, that somebody might be threatening that power and control dynamic. You can also, again, share what you've noticed. Share, I've been seeing some of these things that I don't think is okay, the way your partner's treating you. You can be specific about certain instances or things that you've noticed, and then share that you're concerned for their safety, for their well-being. Again, let them know they don't deserve that kind of treatment. Respect their boundaries. So again, if they're not ready to talk yet, we can't force them to do that. We can't force them to get help. I know a lot of times people say that. They'll call us at CCS and say, how can I get my daughter or get my sister to come and talk with you all? And we can't do that. People have to want to get that support. And when they're ready, they will. But we have to respect their boundaries in the meantime and recognize that we can't make people or force people to do anything. Again, letting them know that you are available to talk whenever they are ready, and let them know that there's a confidential hotline they can call if they ever need it. So this is the Center for Community Solutions hotline that I'm going to be talking about here now. And this is a really great resource because sometimes people maybe they just don't want to talk to you because they feel like it's very awkward or they are worried about your judgment. Even if you're the most non-judgmental person in the world, it can feel very scary to talk to someone about your relationship and what's really going on in it. So a confidential hotline can be a great thing to offer somebody to let them know that there's someone they can talk to, even if they don't want to talk to you. And I'm going to share the hotline number here in just a moment, but I wanted to kind of also speak a little bit to the different resources that CCS has. So as I've mentioned, we are a confidential resource. We also are free, so we don't have any kind of income scale or anything like that. Anybody can access our services. We also are multilingual, so we have different staff who speak different languages, as well as utilizing an interpretation line so that we can translate and interpret conversations in real time in any language that you can imagine. We also really emphasize being survivor-centered and trauma-informed. And again, what we mean by this is that we really recognize that trauma impacts people in so many different ways, and that we're really here for whatever the survivor or victim wants to do. That we're not a service that you have to want to leave to get help from. You can be wanting help and just staying in that relationship and being safer in that relationship. We can help with that as well. So we really try to come with a non-judgmental approach where we're not putting more barriers in the way of people getting support. And that's what it means for us to be survivor-centered. And again, we offer so many different resources and services. We have our 24-hour hotline, which is a great way to get connected with any of our other resources here on screen. We also offer advocacy, which can be support in figuring out if somebody wants to report or wants to go through a criminal or legal process. We also have counseling services, so that's short-term counseling for survivors. We also have legal support. So if somebody is looking at getting a restraining order, we can support them with how to complete that application or just how to navigate the criminal legal process in general, because it can be very confusing to folks at times. We also have a shelter service, so that is a emergency confidential shelters that are available to survivors who are needing, again, a emergency and confidential place to stay. So it's a short-term shelter for those folks. And then we also have prevention services. So that's us going out in the community and working with youth and parents to try to teach about healthy relationships and consent. And If you're interested in learning more about that work, I do have a QR code here that links to our CCS Prevents Instagram, which talks a lot about that work that we're doing with youth, and talks also about healthy relationships and consent and different resources about starting the conversation. So that hotline number is there on the screen. I definitely recommend jotting that down if you are interested in reaching out at any point, because it's not just survivors that can call this hotline. Really, anyone can call a hotline to get help with supporting somebody else, to get more information about our services. This is like the main way to get support from CCS, is actually to call that free and confidential 24/7 crisis hotline. If through calling that hotline, you just want to talk, you just want to get some immediate support, maybe do a little bit of safety planning, we can do all of that over the hotline. But maybe you want to set up an appointment. Maybe you want to actually talk with one of our advocates, one of our counselors, one of our legal team members. In that case, just so you know what to expect, you're going to be asked to leave a voicemail with your name, phone number, and if it's safe for us to call you back and leave a voicemail. And once you do that, one of our advocates will call back and leave a voicemail if you say it's okay, from a blocked number. And that's going to be to schedule an appointment. So this is kind of how all of our appointment-based services work. But again, when you call that hotline, they can help walk you through all these details again as well. And I know our hour went by pretty fast. So if you are someone who's interested in gaining more skills for supporting survivors, and you really are committed to being a supportive person in your community, maybe in your professional work, we do offer professional trainings, and there's limited spots available in them. So if you're interested in that, I definitely recommend checking out our website at ccsd.org/professional-training. And this is a photo of one of our recent training cohorts who completed their work in the last year here. Okay. So as we wrap up, I know we have a few more minutes to answer questions. If anything came up today that you want to know more about, I also invite you, as you're thinking about all this information, to kind of consider what's one thing that you're taking away from today's training. And is there anything you can do to check in with yourself, to do a little self-care after this presentation today? Thank you.
So Cleo, while we're waiting to see if anyone has any additional questions or comments, I did want to read you one comment we received, and this goes back to when you were talking about the age groups of people that are affected by intimate partner violence. We just had an attendee who wanted to point out that elderly can also be in unhealthy and abusive situations. And so I thought that was a good comment and maybe something you want to address.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that. And we definitely do see that people of all ages can experience intimate partner violence, and also elder abuse specifically is unfortunately a issue we do see in the community as well, which again can be from intimate partners, but also can be from family or service providers as well. So thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, any other questions or comments? I'd love to hear from you all. All right, well, thank you all so much. And if there's anything else that you do want to reach out to me about, you're more than welcome to reach out to me via email. My email is cspencer@ccsd.org. And I hope that you have learned something helpful today from this presentation. So take care, and hopefully I'll hear from you in the future.
Thank you so much, Cleo, and thank you everyone for attending today.